Okay, so we have a quick case study for you all. Dolby is a great supporter of SVG, one of our best and finest. So please take your seats and at least be quiet if you're not going to take your seats. I want to introduce Tom Lattie. He's a Senior Director of Corporate Sponsorships with Dolby, so please welcome Tom.
Thank you, Ken. Good morning, everyone. As was mentioned in the agenda, what I'd like to do is take about 10 or 15 minutes and update the audience here on kind of the state of the home entertainment experience. And in particular, like we've seen in many consumer electronics, in particular technology and computing, Moore's Law has really advanced what the living room and the consumer is capable of receiving today. As with all things, it's always fun to look a little back at where we started in the recent past from a home entertainment experience. And although many of us here were always on the cutting edge, if you really think the 90s was a big focus still of broadcast, we were still starting the digital transition, standard definition, stereo audio, broadcast in the VCR. I remember in the late 90s, myself along with about 1.5 million of my closest friends got into satellite television. The adoption rate was still relatively low. I remember my first DSS satellite receiver where S-video and the optical cable and the blue light coming on was a highlight for home entertainment. But we began to see in the late 90s, particularly 98 with CBS, I think the first NFL broadcast in HD. So really moving into the 2000s where we saw UHD, high definition begin to take place as well as home theaters. But even then, it's still a very expensive hobby for people to adopt. In 2001, my wife and I bought a small house, and I convinced her that the living room was so small we had to buy a plasma TV because it's the only thing that would fit above the fireplace. That 42-inch NEC cost us about $7,000. And I remember years later when I donated it, because I kept it for a very long time, the manual referred to it as a svelte 2.5 inches deep, right? So very expensive, not mass adoption. 2004, a HD TiVo box cost about $1,000, right? So the home theater experience in the early 2000s was still a very expensive, very hobbyist kind of thing. The technology wasn't very strong. I remember having to buy a Faruja box to line double so my SD broadcasts looked decent on my very expensive plasma TV. As we got into the late 2000s, closer to 2010, you begin to see those prices come down. You could get a plasma TV for maybe $2,500. As we fast forward to the more recent past in 2015, you really begin to see the price and adoption begin to increase. In 2015, you could go to Costco and buy a television for maybe $2,000. 70-inch Vizio, and this was a big transition. If you think about where we started from an accessibility, not only has the technology gotten more advanced, but the accessibility and the ease of using that became much more commonplace, as did the acquisition. Although we couldn't afford anything he sold in the early 80s, my father worked at a Video Concepts, that remembers these stores, high-end AV stores in the mall. You shift from there with projection televisions to Costco, where you can buy state-of-the-art television and audio equipment for very affordable prices. But even in 2015, while you could buy an ultra-high definition TV for a reasonable price, immersive audio was just beginning to happen in the homes, but it was a very expensive situation. I think that year I convinced my wife that $3,000 was a reasonable amount of money to spend on a Dolby Atmos home theater, which I'll probably have for a very long time. Today, though, we've seen a real quantum leap. Even from 2015 to today, we've seen this really, really advanced pace of technology adoption, as well as the technology that's embedded in these devices. 4K ultra high definition, high dynamic range, immersive audio, and the ability to deliver all of this video technology over a variety of sources. No longer just pay TV, satellite, and broadcasting, but the internet has come out of, in some people's minds, almost nowhere. from 2010 when Netflix first streaming really bad video across the internet to now ultra high definition, and UHD Blu-ray continues to drive consumer interest. What's interesting though is not just the living room, but even what's in our pockets or what we carry. If you look at high-end mobile phones today, over the last 2 years, there's roughly or just over 200 million devices that we carry in our pockets that either have a high dynamic range screen and or immersive audio. So whether it's the Samsung S9 over here that delivers an immersive audio and headphone experience to viewers, or devices like the iPhone 10, which have a high dynamic range display. So this cutting-edge immersive audio-visual experience is not just in the living room, but it's also coming with us on the go in our pockets. What's exciting about these TVs, though, is not only are they more affordable, they're far better than they ever were before. Over half the TVs that are shipped in 2018, both IHS and CTA predict, are going to be 4K UHD capable. So over half the TVs. In fact, I challenge you to find a TV above 55 inches that is not ultra high definition, and more than likely it's a high dynamic range display as well. More than 70% of the TVs that are shipping in 2018 are going to be smart TVs. This is up from just 45% in 2015. So not only are TVs getting brighter, they're getting smarter with streaming apps and functionality embedded into them. CTA estimates that by the end of this year, 21% of all households in the US will have an HDR-capable TV. So we're seeing this really, really fast adoption of these bleeding-edge technologies. The largest growth area from CTA for percentage growth is in the UHD category and the HDR category. In 2017, the UHD attach rate was, or purchase rate was 16%. It's growing to 31% this year. And for HDR, it's going from 5% to this 21% number in just 1 year, from 2017 to 2018. So we see this really, really fast adoption of these new technologies. We're seeing the same thing in home audio, and this is really being driven by the sound bar and the innovation in sound bars. I talked about the $3,000 home theater, speakers probably in the ceiling, wires all over the place. The soundbar penetration in the U.S. is expected to grow to 41% of homes by 2022 and will comprise about 75% of all home theater installations by that time. And this growth is really fueled by these advanced features, whether it's immersive audio or smart speaker technology built into these soundbars. What you saw in the last year and is predicted for the next 2 years is that the top-line revenue for the soundbar market is actually growing at a faster rate than the unit shipment, right? Which means more people are buying more premium product, which has these advanced features. In fact, in 2017, the growth rate of the revenue was 3 times the growth rate of the units. So really, these premium products are driving demand. And we estimate by FutureSource estimates by 2022, about half the sound bars will be above that $300 price point with immersive audio. So these high-end audio features are coming to the home. And as you see in the graphic here, this is from our partner Vizio's website. A wireless technology allows you to deploy these speakers around the house, around the couch, and get this immersive living room experience without a lot of complication. So not only is the price coming down, but the deployability is becoming far more easy. In the early examples I talked about, we focused on, having to source this content, these devices, and know how to configure them. Now you can go to Costco. We got a great display of what the retail model looks out there in the lobby. You can buy the box, you bring it home, you unpack it, you plug it into the wall, and you're good to go. We also see the smart speaker category growing, and I know today we think about mostly in the terms of Alexa and Siri and Google Home. But when you look at the predictions for the smart speaker segment, again from FutureSource, what you see is those early adopter hockey puck devices, the cheap ones that are mostly just for talking, asking about the weather and turning on your lights. Those are going to go from about a third of all volume down to about a quarter of all volume. And what's being replaced as that market continues to grow very rapidly is high-end full-featured speakers. We saw some of that this year in the battle between Amazon Echo speakers, and the Apple HomePod. So people are not only buying these devices, but they're beginning to expect them to be consumer electronic and entertainment devices. Today for music, but we can see how these begin to grow into immersive audio and home theater use cases down the road. So overall, we see the home theater attach rate continue to grow. Today in the U.S., it's about 20% of all 32-inch TVs in the U.S. Are attached to a home theater, so it's a really solid attach rate, particularly with such a low size on the screen. And in North America in particular, we see the soundbar market continue to grow. You know, I talked about the accessibility. This is just an interesting snapshot to think about for a minute. So these are kind of retail prices, you know, off the web today. So what you see here is a modest home theater. That's a 55-inch TCL smart TV with HDR and well, Dolby Vision. There you go. And a Vizio soundbar. These two devices together, that immersive home theater experience, costs less than the iPhone 10 if you were to buy that without having a plan. So it's amazing to think about what used to be a very complex and expensive home theater experience is now more accessible financially than the smartphone in many people's pockets. So, you know, this has been driven, consumer demand has been driven and fulfilled by the streaming platforms today. Netflix launched 4K in 2014, high dynamic range content in 2016, Atmos in 2017. You look at their library today, you know, Netflix has over 500 titles in 4K. Many of those titles are shows, so thousands of hours of 4K content, high percentage of that in high dynamic range. Amazon, Jack Ryan was the #1 binge show for them. That's a 4K, HDR, and immersive audio Dolby Atmos title. They've got about 50 shows, series that are in 4K on their platform today, and about half of them are HDR. And in the TVOD, the transactional VOD, there's about 400 movies you can stream to your home today that are in high dynamic range. Most of them in Dolby Vision. About 250 of those titles are in Dolby Atmos, and over 200 are both immersive audio, Atmos, and HDR combined. So there's this wealth of content that exists today on the internet in an episodic standpoint that's fueling this demand. And what you see is this kind of cyclical, you know, flywheel where the content drives interest, which then drives demand, which drives more interest, which drives more demand. CTA reports that about 35% of consumers intend to buy a video product this season. And in fact, what's really exciting about that is 50% of the people who are intending to buy a UHD or HDR television are first-time buyers. So we see a strong adoption in new buyers. That's about 10 million estimated net new households buying HDR or HDR televisions. And about 70% of the people buying soundbars are first-time buyers, and about 60% of people who are intending to buy a home theater AVR system are first-time buyers. Now, Sports Video Group, and you're all going to tell me, which is true, that, you know, producing a show post-production and streaming it across the internet on demand is far easier than producing a show in real time. And I can't agree more. But what we've been working on really hard with many of our key partners over the last 2 years at Dolby is enabling these broadcasts, and we've made really good progress in this space, particularly in the area of audio. Folks like BT and Sky are broadcasting Premier League day in and day out in immersive audio with Dolby Atmos to consumers in their homes. With the FIFA World Cup, we saw both HDR and immersive audio being broadcast for those games with broadcasters like Channel 1 in Russia and Globosat delivering Atmos for all those games to consumers in the home. With NBC, we've done the Olympics, both in HDR and immersive audio. And in the discussion yesterday about 1080p HDR, there was the Notre Dame home games were referred to. Again, those were HDR and Dolby Atmos. So we're really beginning to learn a lot and add more and more content experience. We've done a lot of testing with other broadcasters, a lot of stadium sports, baseball, soccer, football. It's funny that I don't have a PGA video, but we've even done immersive audio testing with golf, right? So really the adaptation for audio is there, and I think that as we learn more from the production of HDR, we'll continue to see that grow. So there's definitely a lot of work to be done. Shout out to Dome, they were just on stage. This is We just did some Atmos productions with them with the Raptors. Those games were carried on DirecTV over the last 2 weeks. So again, there's still a lot of work to be done, but the technology is there. We're solving many of the production issues, and I think that the carriage issue is the next problem to solve from an end-to-end delivery. Many of these sporting events are delivered across the terrestrial broadcast network here in the U.S. And ATSC 3.0 will allow us to begin to carry those to consumers' homes and MVPDs, as well as OTT delivery. When you look at the penetration of smart TVs, there's definitely the ability to deliver those to the home. So what I would say in closing is, as we all know, we experience the world through our senses, right? And what's exciting in the last couple of years is technology has allowed us to bring that immersive experience, both from an audio and visual experience, into the homes. Because of the adoption rate of these technologies, these aren't far-fetched or far-out ideas. These are experiences that are being delivered today in people's homes, and people have the technology. And as an industry, we have the ability to deliver them from a sports standpoint as well. Thank you.